Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and creepy horror stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Gretelcat. My student submitted the most disturbing living history project I've ever seen. One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the bullshit, living history, assignments we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity, and for an easy way to bring up their GPA. I have been doing this for 17 years, and when I collected the projects this time around, I assumed they would be as dull, if not duller than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class. So I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of, I only owned 2 pairs of pants when I was your age, and my brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into a neighbor's yard. And of course, these projects were peppered with innocent, old person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist you just had to laugh. Now, I had a girl in my class whom I will call Olivia. She was pudgy, quiet, and proved herself a consistent B student. I expected her project to be as unremarkable as her, and perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked interview. My screen hiccuped twice before a grainy image of a living room came into view. The place was a hoarder's hell. Olivia was curled up in an armchair clutching a notebook and looking like a scared animal. Across from her sat a man with a sober countenance, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's owlish eyes flashed towards the screen, then back to the man. "I am here with my great-uncle Stephen," she began almost inaudibly. "He is going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." Great-uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a goddamn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for the questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested questions sheet I had handed out to the students. He answered her curtly. Once or twice I heard her mother whisper, "Speak up, Olivia," from behind the camera. Typical, boring shit. So I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-uncle Stephen emitted a chain-smoker's wheeze. "Nope. Glad to get out of my town though." "Where did you go?" "Balkans." "Aha," she said. I doubted she knew what the Balkans were, and my suspicion was confirmed when she asked, "Was Bacchus very different from here?" "Yes." Mom cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming. But Olivia seemed genuinely interested. "Uncle Stephen," she asked, "what is your very worst memory from the army?" The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray and then slowly lifted himself out of his chair. "I'll be back," he mumbled. The camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same except Great-uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper in plastic sleeves laid atop all the crap sitting on his coffee table. One, he held in his hand. "I was a kid when I enlisted," he said, looking at Olivia. "Your brother's age," he told her. Olivia nodded. "I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor." "Ahem." Mom coughed. Great-uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. "My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved-in rooms, and for some reason, the part that got to me the most was that the school had been like this for years before we got there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by it on their way to go beg for money or whatever shit they did dash. The camera dipped towards the floor as I heard Mom whisper harshly at Great Uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. Do you want to hear this goddamn story or not? I heard him bark in response. Then you better let me tell it how I want. Mom, Olivia chimed. Please stop interrupting. Are you presenting this in front of the class? No, Mom, we're just handing it in to the teacher. I'm sure he's heard the word shit before, Great Uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't he, as a matter of fact, but other than that the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. I'm talking too much anyway, he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it. So I'm gonna read it now. And then I'll tell you what I saw in that basement. A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed into Great Uncle Stephen and his letter. His palsied hands trembled as he held up the paper. This is what he read. Dear Sir, I never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire, but I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not these attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Nadia suffered for longer. I watched in horror knowing I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day, and no one came after me. I doubt they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across a field, visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day and come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried to take Nadia to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home and she died that night. After Nadia and the baby were gone, well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate and slept, thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting though it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once. Even though I didn't listen to the words being said, in fact, the channel I got the clearest was in English, I think, which I don't speak a lick of. But the voices, the music, and the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how long passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course. Since I first holed myself up, it has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some water and food, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was go back to work. So I did. The following morning, I simply returned to the school where I was a janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it. Like I said, Nadia had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciate that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. The teachers never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from my closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know. And the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough not to disrupt the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like it. The schoolhouse is not very big, but does require a lot of maintenance. The floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes, I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around to make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean, but I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups here and there, and I am happy to help. Some days I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio, other times I handle more serious, structural issues. Days when I have work like this, I feel truly instrumental, like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? It took me a long time, but I once again feel that I have purpose. There is a larder behind the school that is full of preserved food. In lieu of payment, I am allowed to take as much food as I need. That arrangement is fine. What would I do with money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my home, just one field away from the school, but when I started sleeping in the basement no one seemed to notice. This school is special to me and I cannot leave it unguarded. When I am besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on the radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time. Except this morning. Because this morning, I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I have been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I have spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time, I have been crying. I am losing my mind without it. I have given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I am going to take my life. I am writing this because the sunlight is starting to die and I know what my fate shall be. I have thought about taking one last walk through the halls of my school, saying goodbye to the students and teachers. I know I will be missed. But I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no more tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach and I am growing dizzy again, like I did after Nadia died. I am not long for this world. But before I take my life, I have closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It is the only room in the basement and has a small casement that lets in just enough light for me to see what I am doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met with this gruesome sight. Perhaps they will see the door is blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I have placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you are reading this, I have one humble request, please fix it. Save my radio. It did not deserve to die in its sleep and I am ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now I am ready to join Nadia and little Ludmila in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for it the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. Stanislav. When Mom zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing, Uncle Stephen," Mom said, her voice choked. "I think we have enough." "Wait," Olivia chirped. "He said there's more." "What did you find?" Before Great-Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great-Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered that there was a second disc. This one was unmarked, but I hoped it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia's. "Hi Miss Garrity. I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying. But I asked him to continue and secretly recorded the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remember you said earlier this year that history is written by the people who win wars." She sucked in a breath and commenced crying. "But everyone's history is important, even if they are sad, pathetic people and even if they never won a single thing in their life. I haven't slept through the night since I finished this project, but you have to hear what my uncle has to say." There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words was beautiful. I was also flattered that she had remembered some trite phrase I threw around because it was what my history teachers said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began again. "Fine," came Mom's frustrated voice. "If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine, but this is not appropriate for a school project." "Let me finish," Great-Uncle Stephen snapped. "If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen." "But Olivia wants to know what happened." I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagined her looking at him expectantly. "So did you find the radio? Or did it get ruined when the school got blown up?" He rasped and I heard the distinct click of a lighter. "That letter," he began slowly, "had a date on it." "What date?" she inquired hungrily. "It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school." "Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago?" "Yes," replied Great-Uncle Stephen. "It had been." There was silence as I felt goosebumps on my arms. The images that came to my mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Great-Uncle Stephen put them into words effortlessly. Clearly he had spent his whole life thinking about it. This man, this Stanislav, went to a vandalized, falling apart schoolhouse and cleaned up blood and rubble like it was spilled drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground under them. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained, he must have gotten soaking wet but was so oblivious that he didn't even feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved food that probably tasted like shit. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did you see the dead body?" "Yes. Hanging from the ceiling, but still amazingly lifelike. He wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago." "Did he look peaceful?" she asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. "Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank, and his face was blue and his eyes were bulging. Like this." I imagined him demonstrating. "And the radio?" Olivia wept. I heard Great-Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. "It was there, all right. And it was still on." Second story. This story was shared by you/18planet. My college has frequent lockdowns. This time they're not letting us out. Brynhorn College is a very small country college plopped down quite literally in the middle of nowhere. With a student body that barely exceeds 500, it's basically a speck of dust among the miles of forest surrounding it. Many of my high school friends would have balked at the notion of attending a college that's 5 miles away from the closest town. But for my quiet, country-loving demeanor, it's perfect. So when I got my acceptance letter to Brynhorn College in April, I was ecstatic. The rush of packing, course selection, finding a roommate, and obtaining financial aid was stressful as one would expect. But as soon as I set foot on campus, all of my stress melted away. I don't know what it is about this place, but everyone just seems happier here. The way people talk, the little skip in everyone's steps as they walk, the professors are all passionate, even the food here tastes happier. Unless you come to Brynhorn College, it's hard to explain. But one thing's for certain, I had found my perfect match. As with all small colleges, however, Brynhorn College has little quirks that are also hard to explain. The main one is what we call periodic lockdown. Periodic lockdown is the kind of thing that seems ridiculous when you really think of it, but everyone is almost too afraid to joke about it because of how serious it's treated. I'd first heard about it during orientation. Until then our orientation leaders had been all sunshine and rainbows, but a dark cloud came over their faces when periodic lockdown came up. If you can only remember one thing from orientation, remember this: whenever a periodic lockdown occurs, it must be taken seriously and must be adhered to, said Sam, one of my orientation leaders. Her liveliness that had been there mere seconds ago was gone. "What's periodic lockdown?" one of my orientation group mates asked. "It's a period of time, usually around an hour or two, when everyone must stay inside their dorm rooms, with the doors locked and lights turned off. Any violation of this rule will be met with instant expulsion." Myself and the other members of my group were taken aback. Part of me wondered if it was an elaborate prank to scare the freshmen. We moved on quickly from the topic, and it wasn't brought up again. But on the 1st of October, a few weeks after school started, my phone buzzed during chemistry. Brynhorn emergency notifications. A periodic lockdown is scheduled on October 2nd, 2 p.m. Central Standard Time to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. You must be in your rooms at least 30 minutes before the lockdown begins. For additional preparations, please visit the school website. Other students and even the professor checked their phones upon receiving the notification. "First one of the school year," the professor said, before carrying on with the lecture. The freshman dorm was abuzz with nervousness, excitement, and fear about the lockdown. Our RA assured everyone of the lockdown's normalcy, but that didn't stop the rumors and theories from making their way into every conversation. "I bet it's a gas leak," my roommate Theo suggested. "They've been doing construction by the Energy Services building for the past couple weeks. They must have a lot of gas leaks then, if it's as normal as the upperclassmen say it is." The next day rolled around. I just stayed in my room the entire morning since my only class had been cancelled in anticipation of the periodic lockdown. Following the school website, Theo and I did all the necessary procedures. We took out the trash, closed the blinds, locked the front door, filled our room's sink with water as an emergency water supply, and turned off all non-essential electric appliances. As it got closer and closer to 2, the hall grew quieter as people ended their conversations and doors slammed shut. As ridiculous as the whole endeavor was, no one wanted to risk being the one caught outside. Right as the clock struck 2, there was a faint, almost hollow-sounding whoosh sound that reverberated through the hall, like a spaceship powering down. It was completely dark. I checked my phone and noticed that I had neither Wi-Fi nor cellular data anymore. What the hell, they must have shut down everything, Theo complained. The show he'd been watching on Netflix was now stuck loading. Even the cell towers aren't working. It must be a regional blackout or something, I said. I turned on my phone flashlight and carried on with the assignment I'd been chipping away at. But that was the only weird thing that happened during the hour. As soon as it hit 3, everything turned back on, and school resumed as though nothing had happened. Periodic lockdowns are always a bit unsettling when they happen, but I've come to accept them as just one of those weird things that colleges sometimes do. They aren't often, maybe once or twice a month at most, and never longer than a couple hours. Occasionally a class or test is missed as a result of a lockdown, but professors were always prepared with online lecture videos and make-up testing dates. My first year of college passed by rather uneventfully, and it seemed as though the second year would be the same. Yesterday, I was eating lunch with my friends when all of our phones buzzed simultaneously. I reached into my pocket to check the notification. Brinhorn Emergency Notifications, a periodic lockdown is scheduled on November 15th, starting at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. You must be in your rooms at least 30 minutes before the lockdown begins. For additional preparations, please visit the school website. What the fuck? That's like 40 minutes from now, my friend Natalie said, looking at her phone. There isn't an end time either. Did they make a mistake with the notification system? I asked. Screw it, I'm not taking any risks, another friend Evelyn said, putting on her backpack and picking up her tray table. I walked here and my dorm is far as fuck, so I'm gonna leave. See y'all later. The dining hall around us gradually evolved into a cacophony of people gathering their belongings and putting away their food, most of which was half-eaten. I reluctantly followed suit, still processing how weird the whole situation was. Getting back to the dorms before the 30-minute mark was out of the question by this point, so why weren't we warned sooner? I was back at the dorms with 25 minutes to spare. The halls were shuddering with the sounds of doors slamming shut, people yelling, and locks clicking into place. I entered my room and began to go through the motions that had been ingrained in my head by that point. Close the blinds, unplug my computer, the fridge, lock the door. Just then my phone buzzed again. I checked it and saw a message from my roommate Theo. Hey Brian, I got in a bike crash on my way back and the chain broke, so I might be a few minutes late. Could you leave the door unlocked so I can get in easily? Thanks. A small pit of dread grew in my stomach. What if he doesn't make it in time? I wondered. Could he be expelled? Okay, but please hurry up if you can, there's like 15 minutes until the lockdown begins, I texted back. A minute later, Theo texted me again, it's all good man, there's no way they'd punish someone after springing it up on us like that lol. I tried to distract myself from the gnawing pit in my stomach by studying for my chemistry quiz, which I didn't even know would happen or not. The hallway gradually got quieter, and I began to convince myself that everything would be okay. My phone buzzed again. My card isn't working for some reason, could you come open the front door for me? The next thing I knew, it was pitch black, and a hollow whoosh echoed throughout the dorm. Periodic lockdown had begun, and my roommate was still outside. Fuck, I muttered. They must have turned off the front door's card reader as part of the lockdown. What happens to Theo now? Does he just have to wait outside until the lockdown ends? I thought about leaving my room to go open the door for him. Maybe no one will notice us if he gets inside fast enough. But what if we're both caught? Why risk getting myself into trouble when I'm safe right now? Not to mention, who knows what the periodic lockdown is for? Maybe there's some kind of animal outside that could be dangerous. But then isn't Theo in danger? What if whatever's out there gets him? My head swam. I turned my phone back on and tapped my browser app, which was thankfully already open to the periodic lockdown information website. I scrolled through the FAQ section and found what I was looking for. Question: what should I do if someone else is out of their room during periodic lockdown? Answer: remain in your room no matter what and keep the door locked. If someone knocks, don't answer the door. Don't let them in. My eyes fixated on the last few words. Don't let them in. That's when the feeling in my stomach went from gnawing to nauseating. My roommate didn't make it back in time. And now I'm supposed to make sure he doesn't make it back at all. And I don't even know when this will all be over. I played some games on my computer, occasionally checking the clock. 1 hour passed. Then 2. A small part of me hoped the lockdown would end by the usual time, but I should have known by now that this was an unusual lockdown. With the remaining time uncertain, I turned off my computer to save battery and sat in the darkness, thoughts consuming my brain. Even the faint slivers of light that crept from the blinds were waning. I didn't dare open them. I checked my phone. 5:16, the previous longest lockdown was less than half this time. I drank the rest of my water and went to refill it at the sink, feeling my way through the pitch-black room. Then ice shot down my veins as I remembered the last step of lockdown preparation. Something I had forgotten about in my haste star. The sink asterisk. Praying for a miracle, I turned on the faucet. Nothing came out. Panic started to fill me. Shit, this must be why they had us fill the sink. Okay, no water. Fuck. How long can a human survive without water again? Is there any water left in the pipes? I tried to get the water running multiple times to no avail. There's no way they'd keep us in lockdown long enough for us to die from thirst, right? Time marched on. Soon it was late afternoon, then evening, then night. Not that I could tell from the window anyway, it had gotten completely dark before 5. Whatever was happening defied the normal day-night cycle. At around 7 I ate one of my frozen meals from the fridge for dinner. In the absence of a working microwave, I had to leave it out on my desk for a while to thaw. Nothing like slightly below room temperature Thai noodle soup to hit the spot. I went to bed a few hours later, figuring I might as well try to skip as much time as I could, hoping I'd be woken by the lights coming back on. Instead, I woke up to knocking on the door. "Brian, can you let me in?" My blood froze. It was still completely dark, but something felt off. Like the air was a bit stuffier than normal. That was Theo's voice, I thought. There were more knocks. "Brian, my card isn't working. Can you please let me in?" Adrenaline shot through me, removing any lingering fatigue. I tapped my phone screen. 3:06, fuck, I've been in lockdown for over 14 hours. I was jolted back by more pounding. "Brian, can you let me in?" Mind racing, I turned on my phone flashlight and scanned the room to see if anything was different. The light, while initially blinding, was a welcome reprieve from the previous 12 hours of darkness. There wasn't anything unusual in the room, but that didn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I slid off my bed and began making my way to the door. I didn't have a plan for what to do, I only knew that I was terrified. The voice came again, louder now that I was closer. "Brian, my card isn't working. Can you please let me in?" I pressed an eye against the peephole. It was too dark to see anything, but for some reason I got the feeling that something was staring directly back at me. My hand wandered to the doorknob before I remembered the website. Don't let them in. I stood there for a minute, my mind racing. Is it really Theo that's standing outside, or something pretending to be him? What happened to your bike yesterday? I asked, my voice hoarse with neglect and dehydration. Silence. Part of me wondered if Theo or whoever was at the door had left, but that was quickly quelled. "Brian, can you let me in?" More pounding. The door seemed to shake more than before, the doorknob vibrating ominously in my hand. "What happened to your bike yesterday, Theo?" I asked again, louder. "Can you hear me?" More silence. Clearly, whoever was on the other end couldn't hear me for some reason, or just wasn't responding. Shook by the whole situation, I felt my way back to my bed and tried to rest. Getting more sleep was hopeless by that point. Theo was relentless, knocking at the door every couple minutes or so. Sometimes I'd get a 10-minute break, other times there would be non-stop pounding for a minute straight or longer. But every single time the thing switched between the same two sentences, with the exact same intonation and inflection, almost like a recording played on loop. "Brian, can you let me in?" and "Brian, my card isn't working. Can you please let me in?" became etched into my brain. For all I knew, the school was stuck in hell, and I was being tormented by a demon who thought it would be funny to imitate my less fortunate roommate. I began to cry. Less than 24 hours ago I was a normal college student, stressed out by normal college things like friendship drama and chemistry tests. Now I was stuck in the dark with no water, no roommate, and no hope of escaping anytime soon. I began to think of my family, wondering if they knew what was happening. Maybe the FBI will start investigating and rescue us all. "Brian, I've been stuck outside all night, please open the door." I froze again. The looping of the other sentences had blended into the background such that this new one stuck out. What does that mean? I wondered. "I'm fucking starving and thirsty and I'm all alone out here, Brian, please let me in." The desperation in the voice put me on edge more than anything that had come before. I checked my phone again. 7:15 a.m. The room suddenly exploded with a flurry of knocks, so much that I could hear the door groaning from stress. "Brian, please. They're going to get me if you don't open the door right now." "Theo, what the fuck is happening?" I shouted from my bed. Silence again. My ears strained to listen. Then came Theo's voice again, quieter now but still clear. "Dude, I wish I knew. I got stuck outside, then I somehow got in but none of the doors are working anymore. Brian, I was literally in the hallway all night. It's so dark out here and I think there's something out here with me." "What's out there, Theo? Are you okay?" I slid off my bed again to head to the door. "I don't know, but I'm scared," Theo shouted. Then came muffled, almost inaudible sobbing sounds. I just want this to be over, I just want to be dash." "Theo, I'm coming," I said, my heart wrenching, my cheeks still wet with tears. But fear lingered in me. "I'll open the door, Theo, promise." You just need to answer one question, alright? Theo sniffled. Okay, what's the question? What happened to your bike yesterday? Silence again, and more of it this time. I stood by the door, heart beating out of my chest, as the minutes ticked by. 5 minutes. Then 10. This is the longest it's been quiet so far, I thought. Why is Theo taking so long to respond? Then, just as I was about to retreat to bed, can you please just open the door, Brian? Answer the question, Theo, I said, my voice shaking. Please, let me in. Theo's voice sounded almost robotic now. I began to back away. You're not Theo. You can't remember what happened to him. I was on the verge of tears again. There was pounding on the door. Please. Brian, please. I can't stay out here. I went back to my bed and stuck my head under the pillow, hoping to drown out the sounds. There was more pounding, and even through the pillow I could hear the muffled please. Brian, please, on repeat. That's not Theo, it can't be, he'd remember, right? But then my mind wandered back to the pain and desperation in his voice. It felt so real. Clearly whatever was imitating him knew how to act. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, it was quiet and noon. Time clearly worked differently now, however, because my window was still completely dark. This was the time that I truly began to fear for my life. Lockdown had now been going on for a full day, and there was no sign of it stopping anytime soon. I'll be dead in 2 days if I don't find something to drink. I tried to think of ideas, a slight headache starting to set in from dehydration. I felt my way around the room, not daring to use my phone flashlight anymore. I reached under Theo's bed and felt something smooth and metallic. I nearly cried from joy when I realized what I had found, a full soda can. I felt around more and counted 2, 3, 4 cans of Pepsi Max soda. Thank God for Theo's sugar addiction, I said to myself. The soda might be enough to get me through an extra day or two, but beyond that I know I will have to think of something to get myself out of here. And so I'm doing the only thing I could think of, I'm turning to the internet. Even though there is no Wi-Fi or cell service, I hope that somehow, someway, my story will get out, and I will be rescued. And if you're reading this, that means it did. But there's one more thing before I'm all caught up. While I was writing this story, Theo came back again. I was hunched at my desk, typing away, my computer brightness turned to a minimum to save energy, when there was a knock. Brian, came Theo's voice. Ice shot through my veins. I shouldn't say anything. He's going to try to manipulate me to open the door. I tried to focus on typing but found it hard to do so. More knocking. Brian, please, I know you're scared. I'm sorry if I scared you, alright? I didn't move or speak. My vision blurred from adrenaline. Listen, Brian, I don't know what's happening. It's like my memory got wiped, or I don't know. But I really don't want to stay out here, please. More silence. I typed a few more words but found that I couldn't think of more. There's something out here. I don't know where it is right now, but I hear it going from room to room sometimes, knocking on the door. It pretends to be other people, like me. I've heard it talk with my voice. My ears perked. Could that really be Theo? Could he be different from what was at the door earlier? I found a pack of water bottles, thankfully. It should be enough for a few days. Please, Brian, I don't want to hide from that thing anymore. What happened to your bike yesterday? I asked again. Brian, I told you, something happened to my memory. It's like I can't remember anything specific from before the lockdown. Please, Brian, you need to trust me. My heart was wrenched. Never had his voice sounded as human as it did now. What if that really was Theo out there? And I had left him to fend for himself the past day and a half. The rule of not opening my door dwelled on me, but what if I actually had the chance to protect Theo? I don't know. Listen, the thing's going to come back any moment now and I'm going to have to leave. Just, please. I know it's scary. Tears pooled up in my eyes. As much as I wanted to open the door, I had to maximize my chances. I'm sorry, Theo, I can't. Silence again. I expected the Theo thing to start repeating its lines again, but there was nothing. And then finally, a faint, almost inaudible, all right. Ever since then, I haven't heard from Theo. But I know that he will likely be back and try to get me to open the door again. If it actually was Theo outside, part of me doesn't want to know. Because the pain of the guilt would be too much to bear. At the time this is being sent, it is currently November 16, 2022, 7:19 Central Standard Time. I will likely have 3 more days. If you're reading this before then, there may still be a chance. Please, do what you can to end the periodic lockdown at Brynhorn College. Third story. This story was shared by you/B4C0NB34TD0WN. Wendigo Encounter. I've been debating on sharing this story with anyone outside of my small circle of people that were there. But I want to share my experience in hopes that it saves someone's life or to give understanding of what someone else has experienced. Late fall 2010, in northern Canada, I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone bedded down for the night, I decided to go grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of reach of the light from the campfire. Out from the tree line, about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I felt kind of funny, dizzy/lightheaded, and I could smell this putrid stink, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust it to the darkness, and along the tree line, I could hear this voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took shape of my relative. "Hello," they said, "I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it at all, so I started to back away and make my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice and I was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry and began shouting at me to come here, so I turned to run away, but as I looked back one more time I saw the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear had made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the river bank and I could hear the heavy breaths and the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the river bank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass trying to lift myself and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally my voice came back and I yelled that, "Someone has my leg." My brother woke up and ran over to where I was. Then he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw and that it looked like my relative, but not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too, I know." That solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared that story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterwards, would see things/dark figures looking into my window or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually, I was seeing this dark figure daily. I went to medicine men/shaman for help, but I've learned that the ceremonies only relieves it temporarily. Friends have given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I learned that it could only do this if it touches you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I loved being outdoors/hunting and in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, make your own conclusions about this. I've paid a price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They are real, I can attest to that. Stay safe everyone. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Jules_1311. There was something not right about the college I visited. My name is Clara Samuel. I'm 17, and I'm a senior at a small high school about an hour outside of Philly. And I'm smart. Really smart actually. I've had straight A's in all of my classes since middle school. I'm not gifted or anything, I just worked my ass off for one reason: getting out of this town and going to college. My parents are both alcoholic idiots who filter in and out of my life. I'm an only child, and I take care of myself for the most part. It seems sad, but I don't mind. I have good friends and I like being independent. But it would be nice to have some help with college. The application process is intense, and I'm already feeling overwhelmed. My parents have no money, so I already know I have to get a scholarship if I want to go anywhere. But that's harder than it seems, and most of the schools I've talked to said they can't help me out. The deadlines are getting closer and I'm starting to get panicky. I was in Spanish class one Tuesday when I got an email. Holding my phone on my lap, I opened it. It read, "Mrs. Samuel. Hi. My name is Jessica Myers, and I'm the Dean of Admissions at White Ridge University in Philadelphia. Your academic record has come to my attention and it is very impressive. I would love if you would stop by for a private tour next week. We are prepared to give you a full scholarship. Please let me know if you plan on stopping by. Jessica Myers, Dean of Admission, White Ridge University." Yes, it was a little weird. A quick Google search brought up the school, and I read some information on it. It was very small, but its academic statistics were impressive. Biology, my major, was one of their most well-known departments. Not only that, they said they would give me a full scholarship. I emailed Jessica back right away, and told her I would stop by on Monday around 4. She responded with the address of her office and told me she would see me then. Next Monday came and I left school after the bell and got in my car. I drove up to Philadelphia, then plugged in the address Jessica gave me. When I arrived on campus, I was struck by how beautiful it was. Everything was brand new and high-tech. The students walking around were beautiful too, with backpacks and White Ridge University sweatshirts. As I passed by them on the street, I noticed they all seemed a little off, maybe. They looked sad and quiet, and I tried to catch their eyes. They looked away. It was strange, but I chalked it up to the stress of starting school again and found Jessica's office. Jessica's office was on the top floor of one of the beautiful buildings. Her assistant instructed me to wait outside her office, and about 5 minutes later Jessica walked out. Jessica was young and beautiful, in a pantsuit and a broad smile. "You must be Clara," she said, taking my hands in her own. "I am so happy to meet you." "It's nice to meet you, too," I said. "Your school is beautiful." "Yes, it is, isn't it?" she said. "We all worked very hard on it." She assistant handed her her coat. "Well, let's not waste any more time. I'm sure you're anxious to see the school. Let's go." Jessica and I left her office. On the way out, I tried to smile at her assistant, but she avoided my eyes. Weird. We started in the dining hall. It was white and brand new, like everything else. It smelled amazing, and the food as it passed by me looked amazing too. The students moved through the line in a robotic sort of way, not speaking. They took the food and put it on their tray, then swiped their student IDs and sat down. One after another, the same thing every time. The more I started to look around, the weirder it got. But Jessica chattered away in my ear about the amazing food they have at White Ridge. "And we can accommodate to everyone," Jessica said, "so don't worry, you'll still get your vegetarian option." My head snapped toward her. "How did you know I'm a vegetarian?" "Just a feeling," Jessica laughed. "I'm one myself. It just makes me feeling like I'm making a difference, you know." Jessica turned on her heel and walked towards the door. I started to follow her, but I caught the eye of a boy sitting alone at a table. His salad sat in front of him, untouched. His eyes grew wide as I looked at him. With the smallest motion of his hand, he beckoned me toward him. I take a step closer. "Get out of here, Clara," he says in a harsh whisper. "Get out." Before I can react, Jessica had her hands around my upper arm, pulling me away. "That's just Kyle. He's the prankster on campus," she laughed. "You know how boys are." Now I was officially freaked out. I allowed Jessica to lead me out of the dining hall to the sidewalk, but I started looking for ways to escape. I wasn't sure what was wrong, but I knew something was. "Next we're going to see the biology lab," Jessica said. "It's state-of-the-art, brand new. You'll love it." Now how the hell did she know that I wanted to major in biology? Jessica showed me the lab, and she's right, it is beautiful. The students worked away with goggles and lab coats, moving robotically between the tables, not speaking. The teacher stood at the front of the room, just standing, immobile. That was all I need to confirm my suspicions. There was something really wrong here. As Jessica turned her back to explain something else, I took my chance. I turned and sprinted out the door. The minute I stepped outside, I am greeted with 20 students and teachers in a line facing me. I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt Jessica come up behind me and grab my arm. She spun me around to face her and put her face inches from mine. "You ungrateful little bitch," she hissed, "I'm prepared to give you money to go to this school, and you run away from me. No wonder your parents don't love you, you disgusting little coward." I felt tears forming in my eyes. "What is this place?" I said in a hushed whisper, "Where the hell am I?" "Oh, shut up," Jessica snapped, "come with me." "No," I started to struggle, "let me go. I want to go home." "If you'd just let me show you what I have to show you, you'd understand," Jessica said calmly. Besides, she motioned to the group of students and teacher gathered around us, their faces expressionless, "You're not getting very far." She had a point. So I went limp, and let her drag me away to the same building her office is in. This time she stops at a different floor, and I follow her down the hall. She paused outside a door, holding a key. "Clara, this room holds your whole future," Jessica said. "Everything Whiteridge can offer you is behind this door, if you chose to accept it." I don't know why I went in. I should have turned and ran. Maybe I could have fought off those people. I could have done anything else besides go in the room. In that room I learned why students chose Whiteridge, and why they didn't really choose at all. I learned why their faces were expressionless and dead, almost defeated. It all made sense after that. It was a one-time mistake. He had it coming. He raped me. I don't regret what I did. I do regret doing it in a place that has security cameras. But I want to know how the hell Jessica got that footage, and what she wants with me. But I don't regret it. Whiteridge will become my new home, maybe I will adjust eventually. But I shouldn't have gone in that room. Maybe jail would be better than this. Clara Jones, Office of Admissions, Whiteridge University. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Togiak. I encountered a Wendigo while making a remote border crossing. We've got crows back at home. In my town we see them every day. Sometimes solo, sometimes in a group. I am well aware that a group of crows is referred to as a murder, but despite this ominous label, they're pretty shy and generally fly away at the first sign of danger. But the pair of big black birds circling the point across the lake were something else entirely. I know that around the Canadian border ravens become more common than crows, and this is what I suppose they were. But these were really big, too big, possibly bigger than an eagle. And as they circled the point, the calls they made were unnerving. Nothing like the caw of a crow. The sounds were screeching, drawn-out croaks, as though to make sure that every creature on the lake was aware of their presence. I kept quiet from my vantage point 200 yards across the bay, and the travelers I had in my charge knew enough to keep still and silent. We were 3/4 done with our journey that had begun at a clandestine location outside of Atikokan. I never thought I could become a smuggler, but here I was, tucked under ancient white pines with a man and woman who were essentially strangers to me. They watched the huge birds with me, whispering back and forth in their native language. I don't know what they were saying, but the look in their eyes showed their fear. And these people have seen things in their homeland bad enough for them to leave with nothing more than a few possessions, and then give all of their money to a stranger who arranged for me to take them through the wilderness to cross the most remote section of the largest unguarded border in the world. Traveling by canoe along a route that my ancestors have traveled since long before there was a border, we had crossed the imaginary line last night, and by this time tomorrow I planned to load them into a van that would be waiting at a trailhead near Ely. This was where we would part ways. For now we were preparing to break camp at a campsite known only to me. I carved it out of the timber a few years ago, and it is able to conceal not only a tent but a canoe as well. There's not much canoe traffic this time of year, but I was doing a final check to make sure the coast was clear when the birds showed up. Figuring there must be something along the shore holding their interest, I fished my binoculars out of my pack to get a closer look at the sinister pair. To the naked eye it looked like a typical rocky point on a shield lake. A smooth rock shoreline gave way to a stand of sparse bulrushes with a couple of boulders. One of the boulders didn't look right. I realized that I was actually looking at a dead moose that had floated up there. Likely a casualty from the moose season that ended the week before. That explained why the pair of birds were circling, and I pulled the binoculars away to study how the birds were behaving. They took turns swooping down low over the moose and then soaring higher than the treetops and letting out their disturbing calls. Then there was movement in the trees. I pulled the binoculars back up and focused in on the mix of birch and fir that was along the shoreline. At first I thought it was a bear, coming down to take advantage of the dead moose. But this was far taller than a bear. Then I saw the antlers. Some smaller trees parted and then what at first I thought was a moose stepped to the water's edge. I've seen hundreds of moose in my time up here, but what I was seeing now didn't make sense. Sure, it had antlers, and it was tall like a moose. But it was mostly without fur, and the color was all wrong, more of a sickly pinkish gray than the dark brown you would expect of a moose. I could see its ribs. And its front legs weren't really legs, they were more like long, gangly arms. Arms that ended in long bony fingers. Even though I was about 200 yards away, I could see the glint of fangs. It stepped from the trees to the water's edge. It paused and looked up at the circling birds. It let out a scream that hung in the air. One of my travelers let out a whimper, and I turned put a raised finger across my lips. I knew we were out of sight of what any typical animal or person could see, but this was far from typical. I flashed back to many years before when I stared wide-eyed at my grandfather as he told stories around the campfire. Flames flickered and birch logs crackled as he described an evil spirit called the Wendigo. Many generations ago a lost hunter turned to cannibalism to survive, and his evil deed transformed him into a horrific beast. A beast that roamed the wilds with an insatiable hunger for flesh. Human or otherwise. While this story terrified me as a child, I never gave it any thought as an adult, as the elders had many tales of spirits and such. But here I was, miles from the nearest road, two strangers in my care, looking at the impossible. I subconsciously reached to feel the outline of my revolver tucked into the back of my pants. The beast had now waded into the water and its claws began tearing at the moose carcass. It ripped off huge chunks of flesh, hide, and bone with ease, shoving them into his gaping mouth where they were crunched and swallowed. The water around the moose carcass was soon tinged red with blood and a pair of giant birds took roost in a tall pine above the beast. The carnage continued as the creature consumed impossible amounts in minutes. I heard one of the travelers whisper, "Monstro." I didn't need translation to know what it meant. They had every reason to be scared now. I've had face-to-face standoffs with wild bears, with big city gangs, with angry fathers. At least with those you have an idea of what you are dealing with. My grandfather never said how one would deal with a Wendigo. With most of the moose consumed, the monster let out another scream. I was back to looking through binoculars, which was a mistake as the beast's face and chest were covered in blood, and flesh clung to its claws. An image I will never be able to erase. Despite having consumed the better part of an adult moose, it was still gaunt in appearance. It took a last look around and I stopped breathing when its gaze seemed to focus on our location for a moment. It slowly turned towards shore and then disappeared into the brush. This cued the black birds to come down for what was left. One bird rested on the moose's hindquarter and picked away at intestines, the other rested on the head and feasted on the eyes and torn open neck. After a few minutes they flew up silently, circled over our location and then headed in the general direction the Wendigo had gone. At least they went in the opposite direction we were headed. We sat in silence for a time, then I pulled out a map. I showed the travelers where we were, where the Wendigo had gone, and where we needed to go to complete the journey. I showed them my gun, which I had kept hidden from them until now, hoping it would ease their fears. It didn't do much to ease my fears. It was a .357 revolver, enough to stop a bear, but what would it do to a Wendigo? I suspected there needed to be some version of a silver bullet to stop an evil spirit. I gestured to them to pack their belongings, which they did quickly and quietly. I calculated that if we traveled lightly and quickly we could be out by nightfall. I decided to leave the tent and everything else not essential. We slid the canoe down the bank, climbed in and pushed off. The woman sat on the floor in the middle, the man was at the bow. I paddled from the stern with intensity. We had about 10 miles to the end of the lake. At the end of the lake was a portage trail of about a half-mile that would bring us to the next lake. We had done a number of portages already on this trip, and after the morning's events I was dreading having to be on foot. There was no other way out. A light wind was at our back, allowing for relatively quick travel. The man was paddling as best he could, but it was marginally helpful at best. The woman kept her head down and did not move. Usually on this kind of trip I try to hug the shoreline to keep a low profile, but now we were tracking right down the middle of the lake. I was making a beeline for a height of land where I knew the portage was, and we continued along in silence. The paddle down the long lake was uneventful, and it was early afternoon when we reached the portage. Once ashore we took a short break and ate some jerky, and then it was time to make the portage. It would be easier now since I had abandoned most of the gear. On earlier portages I had the travelers hide out while I scouted ahead to make sure we would not meet anyone on the trail, but there was no time for that. I think they understood me as I tried to explain the importance of moving quickly and quietly. I pointed to the trail and then to the packs and paddles. They took the cue and I put the canoe up on my shoulders and we plodded along through the forest. It took less than an hour to get to the next lake. There was a forest fire here several years before, and the charred remains of a few old-growth pines stood in stark contrast to the young aspen, birch and spruce that had grown in the void left by the fire. This lake was smaller, with many bays and points, and we were soon back to making progress in the canoe. Wendy 5 we came around a point midway down the lake. I looked to the end of the lake where we would find the next portage and stopped padding. Maybe 300 yards away was the remains of a burnt pine. Roosting in the tree were two birds. Big, black birds. The man in the bow saw them too, and muttered something to the woman. She looked up for the first time and stifled a scream. We had to go past them to get to the next portage, so I kept paddling down the middle, not taking my eyes off the birds. As we got closer it was obvious they were watching us too, their heads pivoting as we passed them. I kept looking back over my shoulder at them, but they held their position. I didn't know what the presence of the birds on our route signified, but based on what I saw this morning it couldn't be good. By the time we were at the end of lake where the next portage was, I could barely make out the tree anymore. I thought that perhaps we were in the clear, but then we all heard the unmistakable sound, the same sound we heard the birds making this morning. Even though they had to be over a mile away, there was no mistaking it. The long, drawn-out croaking continued for a minute, then it was silent again. I paddled towards shore so hard that the bow slid 2 feet onto the bank. "Go! Go! Go!" I yelled. The travelers seemed shocked at my yelling, as I had not said anything to them in the few days we had been together that wasn't a whisper. They both scrambled out of the canoe, grabbed the gear and headed up the path. I again wrestled the canoe onto my shoulders and followed. We still had another lake to cross after this portage, then it was down a creek to where we were to be picked up in a remote parking lot at the end of a forest road. We would be early, but maybe I could get a cell phone signal and get a call or text to the driver. Or maybe we could hitch a ride with a tourist. Any concerns of being intercepted by authorities has now taken a back seat to getting out of here and away from that thing that for all I knew was making its way south toward us. Since we were closer to an access point, this mile-long portage was well traveled and we made good time. The first half was up a slight incline, then it went down much more steeply to the next lake. We reached the top, and paused for a quick rest. I set the canoe down to catch my breath. The crest of the trail allowed a good view of the valley ahead. It also allowed a good view of 2 huge, black birds that were circling above the tree tops. The woman was not able to stifle her scream this time, and this prompted the birds to start up with their ominous calls. In the distance we heard another sound. It was a scream that could have only come from the horror we had seen this morning. While I felt a certain amount of responsibility to the travelers, my concern for them was waning. "You better keep up," I yelled as hoisted the canoe back onto my shoulders. I headed down the steep trail as fast as I could, and I could hear the travelers behind me, stumbling, but not falling too far behind. With the canoe on my shoulders I couldn't see if they were carrying the paddles. Didn't matter, I keep a spare strapped to the supports in the canoe. The steep path made a switchback and was able to see that the man was indeed carrying a paddle and pack, the woman was crying hysterically, carrying nothing. The path here was steep and rough, with many large rocks and roots creating potential tripping hazards. The birds were circling overhead us now, their croaks echoing off the hillside. We heard the distant scream again, although this time it didn't sound so distant. It was not possible for us to move any faster, but I took care to be sure-footed. I could see we were nearly to the bottom of the hill. Once there it would be level ground to the next lake, which was now only a few hundred yards away. I made it to the bottom of the hill where the well-worn path went through a series of large roots and then turned to dirt. Once to the dirt I flipped the canoe off my shoulders and let it land on the hull. The travelers were coming up 50 yards behind me. I grabbed the bow of the canoe and started dragging it, hoping the man would catch up and grab the stern. I started to yell at the couple to hurry, but I was interrupted by another scream from the beast. It was coming from our right and I could now hear branches breaking and what sounded like breathing and snarling. There was no reason to think that the lake would offer refuge from this thing, but it seemed like a better option than facing it here on the path. The man was almost caught up to me, but he stopped to see where his partner was. She had tripped on a root and was now screaming, not sure if it was in pain or terror. Probably more terror, as the Wendigo had broken through the brush along the trail and was now 50 feet behind her. She looked back at it and let out what she meant to be a scream but came out as a yelp. The beast was on her in seconds, and it picked her up over its head and slammed her to the ground. The man dropped to his knees, watching in horror as his partner was torn apart and devoured. When the ate, I resumed dragging the canoe as fast as I could, not looking back. The beast let out another shriek, then there was a scream that I presumed to be from the man. I tried not to think about the snapping and crunching sounds I could hear from behind me. The next lake was now in sight, and even though my entire body wanted to quit, I was now running. The shoreline was sandy and I ran right into the water, allowing the canoe to float past me. I hopped in when the back seat was even with me, and in one motion pulled the tag end of the knot that held my spare paddle in place. A few quick strokes and I was 20 yards from shore. The screams of the beast continued, and the black birds that had been watching the bloodbath from treetops now were starting to swoop around me, getting closer with each pass. The Wendigo was now on the shoreline and it let out the loudest scream of all. It stepped in the water to its knees but stopped, gesturing with its long arms and howling at the sky. Not knowing what to do next, I pulled out my revolver. At the end of this lake was the outlet stream that would lead me to a bridge. For the moment I felt safer where I was. The birds were getting ever bolder, and I could feel the wind as one of them swooped in on me from behind my shoulder. It wheeled around over the bow and came right back at me. It reared back at arm's length with its wings spread and its talons coming right at my face. Taking advantage of a perfect opportunity, one pointed the gun barrel at the bird's center and pulled the trigger. Black feathers flew and the now silenced bird landed in the water and strangely sank out of sight. The other bird flew up high and then quickly descended, coming right at me. I had the gun raised, but the bird did not offer a good target and it flew past my head. Sensing weakness, it circled around and attacked, pecking me on the back of the head with its massive beak. I had to be careful not to tip as I tried to fend it off with the paddle. More determined than ever, the bird came back at me. I fired twice, missing both times. With 3 rounds left in the gun, I knew I better choose my next shots carefully. The bird came from behind me again, this time it wheeled around quickly, planting its talons on my chest and pecking at my eyes. My attempts to fend it off with a fist were not successful and it got a hold of my eyebrow. I could feel flesh pulling away from my skull, and I pointed the gun right at it, and even though I thought the barrel was pressed right into it, I still missed. I resorted to using the gun as a bludgeon that I slammed into its neck. This had a noticeable effect. It let out a deep croak and let go its grip. I was not watching the Wendigo at this point, focused on the dark feathered assailant. I could hear it though, as it let out shrieks and screams louder than a siren. The remaining black bird, shook up some from the pistol whipping, flew in a crooked path now, obviously having difficulty maintaining its course. I felt confident I could take it down with one of my remaining rounds. It came straight at me. I let it peck the top of my head as it went by. It circled around again, and once more I let it get me with a good peck to my temple. It made another loop around, and I was ready when it followed the same path of attack. It came right at me, and I was looking down the barrel right at the bird's head when I pulled the trigger. The raven's head disintegrated in a cloud of black feathers and blood, and the headless body landed at my feet, wings still flapping, talons still grasping. The shrieks of the Wendigo suddenly stopped. It stood motionless, staring out at the lake, not necessarily at me. I set the gun on the seat next to me. There was still 1 round left. I used the paddle as a shovel to lift the dead bird over the side and into the lake, where it too strangely sank out of sight. The Wendigo, while still a fearsome-looking beast with its face and claws covered in blood and flesh, had lost its menacing posture. I pointed the revolver at it, right at its head. I was confident I could hit it, not confident that my one remaining bullet would kill it. For some reason I thought about the old saying, that if carrying a handgun for bear protection you should save the last round for yourself. Pretty sure the old saying applies here. I lowered the gun and watched the beast. With its long bony arms hanging at its sides it turned towards shore, and with 2 big steps it was crashing through the timber, heading away from the lake, away from me, away from my exit point. I sat quietly for a minute, trying to take all of this in. I could no longer hear the sounds of branches breaking. Was the Wendigo gone? Apparently they can't, or won't swim. The ravens must act as seers or scouts for the Wendigo. Once they were eliminated it was like a switch was flipped. I thought about the hapless travelers. I knew it was pointless to go back to where I had last seen them. What would happen to me when I left the lake? It was now late in the afternoon. I slid the revolver with its 1 bullet into the back of my jeans, picked up the paddle and headed for the outlet creek. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.